The mop bucket sloshed quietly as she wheeled it across the marble floor, her shoes squeaking softly with every careful step. The office was pristine, all glass and chrome and ego. She could hear muffled laughter echoing from the executive suite, the kind of laughter that came easy to people who thought the world revolved around their title. Jasmine kept her eyes low. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly as she bent to wipe a streak from the corner of the corridor. She moved with the quiet grace of someone used to being overlooked, used to being mistaken as unimportant. Today, that was the point. She had been working the night shift for less than 3 weeks, long enough to understand how people treated those they believed couldn't help or hurt them. And today, the test would be as clear as the water, still shimmering inside the bucket. "Hey!" The voice cut through the hallway like a whip. She turned just in time to see Gerald Hayes, the operations manager, stalking toward her. Jaw-tight finger, pointed like a weapon. "This floor is still wet. I nearly slipped on the other side," he barked. Jasmine straightened slowly. "I was just about to dry it, sir." His lip curled. "Of course you were," he sneered. "Always. Just about to." "You people are all the same," she blinked. "You people?" Gerald stepped closer, now standing just inches from the mop bucket. His eyes scanned her uniform like it offended him personally. "If I see one more smudge on these floors, I swear." And then without warning, he kicked the mop bucket over. Water spilled everywhere, soaking her shoes, splashing up onto her pant legs and apron. The dirty water streaked across the white tiles like a silent insult. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't gasp. She didn't flinch. She stood there, drenched her chin, lifting by just a fraction. Not in defiance, but in awareness. Because in that moment, Gerald had made the mistake she'd been waiting for. A security camera blinked from the corner. He didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. He leaned in, voice low and sharp. "Clean it up now. And next time, stay out of my way." She nodded slowly, kneeling with the mop, her fingers trembling slightly, but not from fear, from restraint. Gerald stormed off, muttering under his breath. Across the hall, an intern peeked around the corner, saw the puddle, saw the soaked woman scrubbing silently, then disappeared without a word. It always happened that way. People saw, then chose silence. But this time, silence was a choice Jasmine made for herself. Because she wasn't just some night cleaner, hired through a temp agency. She was the daughter of the CEO in this building. It bore her family's name. But they didn't know that yet. Not Gerald, not the laughing executives upstairs. Not the ones who barked coffee orders without eye contact, or passed her in elevators as if she were part of the furniture. They thought she was invisible. But she was here to see the truth, and Gerald had just handed it to her. If you've ever been underestimated, ever been treated like you don't belong, remember this? Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one writing the future. Don't scroll past without sharing this story if it reminded you that dignity doesn't come from a title. It comes from how you treat others when you think no one is watching. The steam from her soaked trousers still clung faintly to her legs as Jasmine stepped into the locker room, far from the polished marble floors where her dignity had just been tested. The fluorescent light above flickered slightly, casting the room in a dull haze. She peeled off the damp apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the bench like a soldier putting down armor. A janitor's uniform was never meant to fit her life, not tailored, not clean cut, not in line with her world of private schools, global conferences, and boardroom briefings. But in this moment, it fit her purpose exactly. She sat down, letting the silence press in, and allowed herself one deep, slow breath. She didn't need pity, she needed focus. 3 weeks ago, none of this had been in motion. She had been preparing for her transition into an executive advisory role, shadowing her father, Robert Carter, in his final year as CEO of Carter & Wells Real Estate Holdings, a legacy company, family-built, family-led, and dangerously complacent beneath the surface. Then came the report, a whistleblower, anonymous, concise, and disturbing, allegations of workplace toxicity, management abuse, racial bias, favoritism, a culture of silence. Her father had read the report aloud, standing in his office with a furrowed brow and a heavy heart. "I've walked this building for over 30 years, he said, but somehow I think I've stopped seeing it." Jasmine had said nothing at first. Then she spoke the words that changed everything. "Let me go in." Her father had stared at her. "You mean work undercover? Not as a temp, as invisible?" Let me see what they show to the ones they think don't matter. He resisted, of course he did. She was his only daughter. She had never scrubbed floors, worked a night shift, or faced the sting of deliberate invisibility, but that was exactly the point. I need to earn this place from the ground up, she told him. If I'm going to help lead this company one day, I need to understand what happens below the boardroom table. Robert had gone silent for a long moment, then simply nodded. 2 days later, a new name appeared on the custodial roster, Jazz Wilson. No background check required, just a pair of overalls, a fake ID, and a story about needing flexible night hours to care for her sick aunt. No one questioned her. No one looked twice. That was the first red flag. Now, weeks later, the disguise had grown heavier. Not physically, but emotionally. She had seen more than she expected. The good. Yes, it was there, a few kind faces, a young cleaner who offered her extra gloves when she blistered, a cafeteria cashier who remembered her name when others couldn't be bothered. But the cruelty ran deeper, systemic. Casual rehearsed Gerald Hayes with his clipped insults and unchecked power Derek from marketing, who treated her like a nuisance anytime she passed through his floor. Veronica, who barked orders with all the entitlement of someone allergic to humility, and Karen from HR, who dismissed complaints faster than she could file them. They weren't just disrespectful. They were convinced of their untouchable status. That conviction was about to cost them everything, because Jasmine wasn't gathering anecdotes. She was collecting evidence, every word, every insult, every security camera, timestamp, every paper trail buried beneath desks, drawers, and email chains. And soon it would all come to light. She glanced down at her hands, calloused now, tired, but not weak. She had walked into this building as an experiment, but now she carried something heavier than a mop. She carried judgment. And when the time came, she wouldn't shout it. She would let the truth speak for itself. The building felt different at night. Gone were the echoes of sales calls, the clicks of designer heels, the artificial laughter bouncing off glass walls. In their place came the steady hum of fluorescent lights, the distant whir of vacuums, the slow, rhythmic sound of a mop moving across tile. This was the world Jasmine had chosen to step into. Each night began the same. She'd clock in through the back entrance, no ID badge, no biometric scan, just a handwritten logbook and a nod from the security guard who barely looked up from his screen. She changed in silence. Her locker number 312 held only her uniform and a travel-sized bottle of detergent. There were no welcome banners here, no birthday cupcakes or Slack emojis, just sweat, bleach, and routine. Jasmine worked floor by floor, starting from the bottom. It was strange how the higher the floor, the colder the people had been during the day. Yet at night, every floor held the same dust, the same discarded coffee cups, the same bathroom mirrors streaked with fingerprints. Dirt didn't care about titles. On her third night, she met Rosa. Rosa was in her late 50s, sharp-eyed and quick-handed. She moved like someone who had no time for nonsense, yet carried an unspoken tenderness in the way she refilled the soap dispensers without ever letting them run dry. Keep your head down, Rosa had whispered that first night. Clean fast, but not too fast. They'll pile more work on you. Jasmine had nodded. By the fifth night, they shared quiet smiles between shifts. Not friends, not yet, but seen. It was Rosa who warned her about the freighted elevator. Don't get stuck in it. Took them 3 hours to notice I was missing last winter. It was Rosa who slipped her a granola bar when Jasmine skipped dinner for the third night in a row. No one in the executive lounge ever offered her so much as a napkin. The work was exhausting. Physically, yes, but emotionally more so. She'd clean the executive kitchen, wiping granite counters smeared with espresso, knowing full well those same hands that left the mess wouldn't have acknowledged her in daylight. She emptied trash cans with crumpled meeting notes that detailed million-dollar accounts. She vacuumed carpet in boardrooms where decisions were made that shaped hundreds of lives, but not once were the people who cleaned those spaces consulted or even noticed. One night, while polishing the brass handles outside the main conference room, she overheard two middle managers leaving late. "Did you see the new janitor? The skinny one of them said with a laugh. Probably doesn't speak a word of English." The other chuckled. "Doesn't matter, they're all the same. Ghosts with gloves. Ghosts, that's what they called them. Not workers, not humans. Ghosts, that word settled inside her like ice. She never flinched when she overheard things like that. She just added them to the growing ledger in her mind. This wasn't about one bad day, it was a culture. A rot that had quietly infected the corners of the company her father had spent decades building. And she was beginning to realize it wasn't just Gerald or Karen or Derek. It was bigger than individuals. It was how the system itself taught people to look down the moment they looked up. But even in the shadow of that rot, there was light. Like the night she saw Rosa sit quietly beside a new hire, whose hands trembled after her first shift. No words, just presence. Or when Omar, the night security guard, covered for Jasmine's extra 15 minutes so she could scrub out a rusted stain she couldn't leave half done. He never asked why she cared so much. In these quiet corners, Jasmine saw what real work looked like, what real dignity meant. And more than anything, she saw that these were the people the company had forgotten to protect. But she hadn't forgotten. Not now. Not ever. By the second week, Jasmine had become part of the background. No one looked at her twice anymore. Not in the lobby, not in the hallways, not even when she passed through the executive wing with her gloves still damp and her knees aching from hours on the tile. To them, she was wallpaper, the kind that absorbed sound and swallowed presence. She noticed it most in the mornings just before her shift ended and theirs began. The handoff between night and day exposed everything. Who nodded, who smiled, who stepped aside, and who didn't. Most didn't. She'd hold the elevator door open only to be greeted with silence. No thank you. No eye contact. Sometimes they'd step in and press the button without acknowledging her hand was still on the door. One man, slick hair, tailored coat, once turned his back on her completely, adjusting his scarf in the reflection of the elevator wall like she didn't exist. Another day, while refilling the paper towels in the staff restroom, she overheard two women chatting as they reapplied lipstick. Honestly, if I see one more cleaner lingering in our break room, I'm reporting it. I don't care if they're tired, it's just unprofessional. The other giggled, especially that skinny one. She always looks like she's eavesdropping. They didn't realize she was just 2 feet away, kneeling behind the door, quietly replacing a broken soap cartridge. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. It wasn't just the comments, it was the pattern. A slow drip of dismissal. 1,000 small cuts, none deep enough to scream but all deliberate. They'd leave trash on countertops inches from the bin. Coffee cups with lipstick stains abandoned in elevators. Lunch leftovers leaking in boxes labeled, "Do not leave overnight." No one expected her to care. No one thought she mattered, and still she cleaned it all. Because that was the point. She needed to see how the company treated its lowest paid workers. Not on paper, not in polished HR memos, but in lived reality. She'd once read that the fastest way to understand a culture wasn't to audit its policies, but to observe how it treats people with no power. Now she was living that audit in real time. Even when she wasn't working, the uniform stuck to her like a second skin. One afternoon, walking home in her janitor's hoodie, she stopped by the corner deli to grab a water. The man behind the counter, whom she had chatted with dozens of times before in her real life, barely glanced at her. She spoke. He looked confused. "Do I know you?" She smiled faintly. "No, I guess not." There was something haunting about that realization that a change of clothes and posture could erase her from recognition. That so much of the respect people offered was tied not to who she was, but to what they assumed she was worth. And yet, even in her lowest moments, she refused to let the bitterness win. One morning, after scrubbing the lobby floor for over an hour, a junior associate strode across it without slowing down, dragging a trail of salt and snow from his boots. He didn't apologize, didn't look back, just left footprints behind him like permission slips for arrogance. Jasmine stared at them for a long second, then she picked up the mop and cleaned them anyway. Not because she had to, but because someone had to. And she wanted to know what it felt like to carry that responsibility day after day while being looked through, talked over, dismissed as a background detail in the very company she might one day lead. It wasn't the dirt that was hardest to scrub. It was the weight of being unseen, but soon they would all see her. And not because she raised her voice, but because she had stayed long enough in their shadow to understand exactly how to shine light on the truth. Gerald Hayes never missed a chance to remind people who was in charge. He didn't lead with guidance. He led with intimidation, an iron fist wrapped in a management badge and a tie 2 shades too loud. To most employees, he was tolerable in public and brutal in private. But to the janitorial staff, especially the night crew, he was something else entirely. A tyrant in khakis. Jasmine had felt his presence before she even saw him. The shift in energy when he entered the building. The way conversations fell silent and backs straightened. Gerald liked control, but more than that, he liked dominance, and he exercised it in the pettiest ways imaginable. "Clocking 2 minutes late," he barked one evening, glancing at the schedule sheet. "You think you're irreplaceable." "I wasn't late," Jasmine said calmly. "I've been here since 6. Then maybe your handwriting's lazy." "Fix it." He shoved a pen into her hand without looking at her face. His tone was always a shade too sharp. His words wrapped in venom disguised as oversight. Later that same shift, he appeared again. This time while she was cleaning the 4th floor hallway. He walked directly behind her, inspecting every inch of the freshly mopped tile with exaggerated scrutiny, like he was evaluating a crime scene. "You missed a streak," he said. She looked back. There was no streak. Still she nodded and went over it again. "Use more pressure," he snapped. "Or maybe this job's too hard for you." She kept scrubbing. That was his game, constant poking. Microaggressions delivered like training. He'd question everything, how she folded the cleaning cloth, how she lined up the supplies on the cart, even how she stood when resting between tasks. He once made her redo an entire restroom because he smelled something off. She knew what it really was, his desire to punish her for simply existing outside the mold he expected. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he watched her, as if waiting for her to break. But Jasmine never gave him the satisfaction. Each time he barked, she moved with measured calm. Each insult she absorbed like rain on stone, cold, wet, but powerless to erode her resolve. "You think you're better than this job?" he asked her one night as she emptied the last trash bin near the elevator bay. She looked up, gloves in hand. "No," she said. "I think the job deserves better than how you treat the people doing it." His eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone," she didn't respond, because she knew the truth. Men like Gerald weren't made insecure by mistakes. They were made insecure by composure, by people who stood tall even when bent over a mop bucket, by those who endured without apology, and that terrified him. She watched him walk away, still puffed up with imagined authority, and realized something important. Gerald didn't just abuse power. He needed to. It fed him. Every unnecessary inspection, every cruel comment, every unspoken threat. It wasn't about the job, it was about control. But control only works when the other person doesn't see through it. And Jasmine had been watching him longer than he realized. Soon the roles would reverse. And when they did, Gerald wouldn't just lose his position. He would be forced to see the reflection of the person he truly was. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of quiet midweek night where most of the building had emptied, the fluorescent hum of ceiling lights stretching across rows of vacant desks. Jasmine was on the 12th floor finishing her rotation. Her cleaning cart stood neatly beside her as she wiped down the glass partitions, her motions practiced steady. She didn't hear Gerald approach. His footsteps were muffled by the carpet, but his presence announced itself in a gust of arrogance and aftershave. "Still here," he muttered. She didn't turn. "Still finishing the schedule, Mr. Hayes?" He chuckled, but there was no warmth. "You people are always slow after the second week." Lazy by the third, she tightened her grip on the rag. Gerald paced behind her, pretending to inspect the freshly cleaned surfaces, his hands clasped behind his back like a king surveying peasantry. Then without warning, he turned and rammed his knee into the side of her cart. It toppled. The bucket flipped, and with a sickening splash, murky gray water gushed across the polished floor, slapping against her ankles and soaking into her pant legs. Supplies scattered. A sponge rolled to the far wall, but Gerald wasn't done. He picked up the now empty bucket, raised it as if to examine the damage, and then tipped what little water remained directly over her head. It hit with a cold slap. Jasmine stood there drenched again, her hair dripping water, sliding down her neck and pooling inside her collar. Her hand stayed by her side, her eyes locked forward. He smirked. "You missed a spot," he said, and then as casually as if he had adjusted a painting on the wall, he walked off whistling to himself. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't move. Not for a long moment, because this wasn't about humiliation. Not anymore. It was about exposure, and he had just exposed everything. Not just his cruelty, but the permission he believed he had to show it. The comfort he had in believing there would be no consequences, that the cameras wouldn't matter, that no one would believe someone in overalls and soaked sneakers over a man with a title. But he had made one fatal error. He assumed she was powerless. Slowly, Jasmine reached for the mop. Her fingers moved methodically, wringing the cloth, reclaiming her rhythm. She cleaned the mess he made, she always did. But this time she didn't do it for the sake of duty. She did it because she knew it was the last mess she'd ever clean under his shadow. Derek Vaughn dressed like he was always moments away from a magazine. Shoot, slim-cut suits, loud designer ties, and loafers polished to a near-mirror sheen. His smile came quick and wide, but never genuine. He was one of those men whose charm only extended upward, never down. If you couldn't benefit him, you were furniture, or worse, an inconvenience, and Jasmine in his eyes was both. The first time she encountered him was after she had finished meticulously organizing the recycling bins outside the marketing department. She'd even wiped the chrome lids until they reflected the overhead lights. But as she passed by the hallway again, 15 minutes later, she saw the bins overturned, deliberately plastic bottles scattered, banana peel smeared across the wall, sticky coffee sludge leaking from a paper cup. Derek stood nearby with his assistant, laughing at something on his phone. "Excuse me," Jasmine said, gesturing to the mess. "Was this accidental?" He barely glanced up. "Nope," there was a pause. "Then I didn't like how they were lined up," he said. "Looked uneven." She blinked. He added with a grin, "Besides, cleaning's your job, right? You should be thanking me for giving you something to do." Jasmine said nothing. She knelt and began cleaning. Again, but that was just the beginning. Every night for the next week, there was something half-eaten takeout left intentionally in the middle of the floor, sticky notes shredded and scattered across the hallway, soda spilled beneath his desk with a trail leading to the printer. Each time she passed through, there was a new chore waiting. Never subtle, never accidental, and always followed by Derek's smug voice. "Oh, look, Jasmine's back. You missed a spot again." He remembered her name, but never said it with respect, only mockery. He once called her over during a meeting just to hand her a crumpled napkin, still greasy from his lunch, and then dismissed her like she was interrupting. One evening, after she'd finally gotten ahead of schedule, she paused for a moment outside the break room, stretching her sore shoulders, rubbing her wrists. Derek walked in, glanced at her leaning against the wall, and said loud enough for the others to hear, "You're not paid to lounge." She straightened. "I wasn't." He cut her off. "Clock's ticking. You want to work here or not?" She returned to her cart without another word, but she wrote his name down that night. Not in anger. In precision. Derek Vaughn wasn't just entitled. He believed his behavior was a right. That power gave him permission. That the lower someone stood on the corporate ladder, the harder he could stomp on their fingers. But what he didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that Jasmine wasn't collecting paychecks. She was collecting patterns. And every time he smirked, every time he barked, every time he turned a paper cup into a weapon of disrespect, he etched his role deeper into the narrative she was preparing to reveal. Derek believed he was untouchable. He was about to learn he'd never been more visible in his life. The Human Resources office sat tucked behind frosted glass, as if deliberately separated from the pulse of the building. It had the soft lighting and fake greenery of a place meant to look safe. But Jasmine knew better. She had been mulling the decision for days. After Gerald's abuse, after Derek's constant humiliation, she told herself she would endure. But there had to be a line, and someone in this company had to pretend to care. So she walked in. Karen Myers looked up from her desk, lips painted the color of a muted apology, fingers hovering above a keyboard she clearly didn't want to stop using. "Yes," she said. "I need to file a workplace grievance," Jasmine said, steady but quiet. Karen sighed. Not rudely, just efficiently. "Position janitorial staff." Karen's eyes dropped to her screen again. "Name Jazz Wilson." She tapped the keyboard. "We usually route janitorial concerns through facilities management." "I've already done that," Jasmine replied. "They ignored it. I was told HR handles harassment." That made Karen pause. She looked up again, this time with slightly narrowed eyes. "Harassment," Jasmine nodded. "Ongoing verbal mistreatment by Gerald Hayes. Repeated targeting by Derek Vaughn." "I have documentation." Karen blinked slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she reached for a standard incident report form, slid it across the desk and placed a pen on top like it was a burden. "Fill this out," she said. Jasmine did. Meticulously dates, times, direct quotes, patterns of behavior. She even included photos, small printed captures from hallway cameras. Timestamps marked showing moments where Derek's deliberate messes had been made immediately after her previous cleanings. When she slid the completed form back to Karen, the woman skimmed it quickly, then set it aside without comment. "I'll review it." "When can I expect a follow-up?" Jasmine asked. Karen offered a practiced smile. "Well, these things take time, and sometimes there's misunderstanding, especially between staff and management levels." Jasmine tilted her head. "Misunderstanding?" Karen folded her hands. "Mr. Hayes and Mr. Vaughn are both senior team members. We want to make sure any actions we take are measured. You know how perception works?" Jasmine stared at her, realizing exactly what this meant. This wasn't about truth, it was about hierarchy, about optics, about protecting the company's face at the cost of its soul. "I submitted this because I thought this office was neutral ground," Jasmine said carefully. "I thought HR was meant to protect people, not titles." Karen's smile flattened. "It's not that simple. It should be." Karen didn't respond. She tucked the form into a drawer. "I'll be in touch," she said, already turning back to her screen. As Jasmine walked out, her steps felt heavier than when she had entered, not because she had lost, but because she'd confirmed what she needed to know. The company wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as designed, and she was done asking for help from people whose job was to pretend they cared. From that moment forward, she stopped submitting reports. She started building a case. The executive conference room was a shrine to ambition. Polished oak table, chrome accents, chairs wrapped in leather, the color of wealth. Jasmine had only entered it once before, and even then only to vacuum the corners and wipe down untouched coffee mugs after late meetings. Tonight it was different. She wasn't supposed to be there at all. But Rosa had called out sick, and when Jasmine's supervisor called her in to cover the 11th floor cleanup, she accepted, knowing full well what that floor meant. It was Veronica Wells's domain, vice president of sales, the kind of woman whose walk clicked like a metronome of power. She carried herself like someone who'd fought her way up and was determined to keep everyone else down. Jasmine had just finished lining up the chairs around the conference table. When the glass door flung open, Veronica strode in, heels snapping, phone pressed to her ear. She didn't acknowledge Jasmine, just walked straight to the head of the table and began barking into the phone. "If that number drops below projection again, I will cancel the campaign. Do you hear me?" Jasmine moved to exit, but the narrow hallway forced her to pause, waiting for Veronica to finish. That pause was her mistake. Veronica ended the call with a sigh, sharp enough to slice glass, then turned and saw Jasmine. Still standing there, still holding a dustpan. "What are you doing?" she snapped. "I was just about to leave, ma'am. I didn't want to interrupt your call." Veronica walked toward her, slowly, eyes narrowing. "Did I ask for your presence here?" "No, ma'am. And yet you're standing here like you own the place." Jasmine blinked, surprised by the venom in her tone. "I'm sorry. Don't you dare talk back to me." Jasmine's voice dropped. "I wasn't." And that's when it happened. The slap came fast and loud. Open palm across the face, the sound cracked through the conference room like a gunshot muffled by money. Jasmine staggered. Half a step, eyes wide, her cheek already stinging. Veronica stood over her, breathing hard, not with regret, but entitlement. "You people never learn," she hissed. "Always pushing limits, always thinking rules don't apply to you." Jasmine didn't reply. She didn't lift her hand. She didn't even touch her cheek. She just stared. And in that stillness, unmoving, unbroken, Veronica faltered only for a second, but it was enough. Enough for Jasmine to see the flicker of doubt, the sudden awareness that maybe, just maybe, she had gone too far, that a security camera blinked above them, that the silence wasn't consent, that maybe this wasn't a nobody after all. Veronica scoffed and turned away. "Get out," Jasmine did. But she didn't walk like a servant. She walked like someone who had just finished collecting her final piece of evidence. Jasmine sat alone in the locker room, the fluorescent lights buzzing above her like a silent interrogation. The sting on her cheek had dulled, but the memory hadn't. She stared at the reflection in the dented mirror. No makeup, no jewelry, no title, just her. And still she carried more power than anyone in this building could begin to imagine. The slap wasn't the breaking point, it was the confirmation. They weren't just careless, they were emboldened. They believed there were no eyes on them, no consequences, no higher truth. So Jasmine decided to show them what truth looked like when it was watching, quietly recording everything. That night, she bought a discreet lapel mic, a tiny camera no bigger than a coat button, a secure cloud folder under an anonymous name. She kept the devices hidden inside her cart, nestled beneath gloves and polish bottles. At the start of every shift, she'd press record before stepping into the building. She didn't need confrontation. She needed patterns. Veronica's slap was followed 2 days later by her mocking Jasmine for being too slow to replace the toilet paper in the executive restroom. Gerald continued inspecting her hallway work like a military drill sergeant, pointing out imaginary smudges and threatening to deduct lateness from paychecks he had no authority over. Derek upped his game accidentally on purpose, dropping a bag of shredded documents and then laughing as Jasmine picked them up. "You've got such delicate hands for a cleaner," he said. "Too bad they're wasted." Every word, every smirk, every dismissive gesture, captured and backed up off-site, time-stamped, backed with footage from hallway security cams. She had quietly confirmed with Omar, the night security guard, were indeed functional. He didn't ask questions, just nodded when she said, "Save the tapes." She started writing notes too, observations, background patterns, who laughed when they saw her stumble, who turned away, who stayed silent while watching harassment unfold. And while all this happened, she never once slipped, never once gave them a reason to think she was anything more than who they assumed. She made her uniform part of her armor, her silence part of her strength, her restraint part of her strategy. In the elevator, she stood behind Veronica and Derek, eyes lowered, hands folded. In the stairwell, she stepped aside as Gerald barged through, muttering about lazy night rats. In the break room, she smiled gently at the cafeteria worker, who wiped his hands before handing her the food she'd paid for, one of the few who treated her like a person. Every interaction added a layer to the story she was building. Not a revenge plot, a truth file. One night, she returned to her locker to find a sticky note tucked into the corner of the door. No name, just 5 words. "We see it too, careful." She read it twice, folded it, and slipped it into her pocket. Someone else had noticed, someone else had been watching. She wasn't alone anymore, but she had to keep moving as if she were, because the next part of her plan wasn't just about enduring mistreatment. It was about holding up a mirror to the entire building and forcing them to look. By the 3rd week, Jasmine's evidence folder wasn't just filled with footage of disrespect. It was growing darker. Rosa had returned to her shift, limping slightly from an old knee injury. One night as they crossed paths in the freight elevator, she leaned in and whispered, "Don't mop near the executive printers. Derek's been acting strange near them." That was all she needed. That was all she. The next night, Jasmine finished her rounds early and lingered near the 12th floor. She rolled her cart slowly past the glass-walled marketing suite, silent and invisible. Derek was there after hours alone with the lights dimmed except for his desk lamp and the glowing blue of the printer. She paused, pretending to adjust her cart's handle. He printed a thick set of papers, glanced toward the hallway, and then quickly slipped the stack into a plain manila envelope. Jasmine angled her camera just slightly, capturing everything through the reflection in the darkened glass. Then he grabbed his coat, tucked the envelope under his arm, and left through the emergency stairwell. That wasn't routine. The following evening, she reviewed the footage, the print job, multiple sheets with charts, revenue reports, and what appeared to be internal account access data. Sensitive, she started cross-referencing timestamps. And what she discovered next unraveled everything. Karen, HR director and self-appointed protector of the company's elite, had been in contact with Derek far more frequently than their roles required. Jasmine had noticed how often they left the building together or held impromptu meetings in the HR glass office. Digging deeper, she caught snippets of conversations. Karen subtly instructing Derek to wipe that line item and delay expense report approval. It sounded like code, but not well disguised. By splicing 2 nights worth of audio, Jasmine caught the line that sealed it. "As long as Robert doesn't see the Q4 variance, the siphoning will stay buried." "You worry too much." Siphoning. She replayed it 3 times just to be sure. What started as a test of culture had just become a corporate crime scene. Then came Gerald. One evening, she followed him not to his car, but to the storage area in the basement, where she watched him accept a thick envelope from a man she didn't recognize. Cash. It looked like it. The exchange was fast, quiet, and deliberate. Her hidden camera caught enough to make the implication impossible to ignore. A janitor with no power should have walked away. Jasmine pressed record. She began mapping the connections. Veronica, Derek, Gerald, Karen, 4 people, dolls in positions of power, all treating her with contempt, and all now linked by behaviors that reached far beyond disrespect. This wasn't just a toxic workplace. It was a syndicate of entitlement, selling data, hiding numbers, taking under-the-table payouts. Jasmine realized something else too. They hadn't just assumed she was invisible. They had grown careless because no one ever held them accountable. No board meetings caught it, no performance reviews challenged it. They had mistaken fear for loyalty and silence for complicity. But Jasmine wasn't afraid, and she wasn't silent. The camera hidden inside her cart had captured more than any annual audit ever had, and she was nearly ready. Just one final step remained: gather it, compile it, and walk into the boardroom, not as a cleaner, but as the storm they never saw coming. The documents lay neatly across the long oak desk in her father's private office. Screenshots, transcripts, photographs, timestamps, financial trails that could bury careers and shake the company to its foundation. Robert Carter stood at the window watching the skyline fade into dusk, the city glowing like 1,000 secrets. When Jasmine finished speaking, there was a long pause. Then he turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You were never just testing culture, were you?" he asked softly. "No," she replied. "I was testing the people entrusted with protecting it." He approached the desk, fingers brushing lightly over the pile of damning evidence. "Veronica, Derek, Karen, Gerald," he murmured. "I hired them, I trusted them, and they trusted." "You wouldn't look beneath the surface," Jasmine said. "That's what allowed them to rot this place from the inside." He looked at her not as a daughter, but as a partner. "We need to act." Now Jasmine nodded. "We hold an emergency town hall, one that forces everyone into the same room, board members, department heads, staff from every level." Her father folded his arms. "And what's the plan once we get them there?" She inhaled slowly. "We show them who they've become, and then we remind them who built this company." He studied her for a long moment, the weight of legacy pressing between them. "You sure you want to reveal yourself in front of all of them?" "Not yet," she said. "They need to hear the truth before they know who's telling it." He smiled faintly. "That's exactly what your mother would have done." The next 48 hours moved like precision clockwork. Robert sent the summons, an urgent company-wide leadership realignment briefing, mandatory for all department heads. No details, no agenda, just a time and place. Meanwhile, Jasmine assembled her case like a prosecutor preparing for trial. Each clip trimmed, each voice isolated, each financial anomaly backed with a screenshot. It wasn't enough to expose individual failures. She needed to show the pattern, the culture, the rot that wore a suit and smiled in quarterly meetings. On the morning of the meeting, Jasmine arrived early wearing her uniform one last time. Not because she had to, but because the moment would carry more weight if she shed that uniform in front of the very people who had tried to make her feel small. She waited backstage behind the curtain of the main conference auditorium. On the other side, the chatter of power buzzed like static. Veronica's clipped tone, Derek's laugh, Gerald's impatient pacing. Karen sat near the front, glancing at her watch with a look of thinly veiled superiority. They had no idea what was coming. Robert stepped up to the microphone at exactly 9:00 a.m. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, voice calm, steady. "Before we begin, I ask that no one leaves. What you're about to witness will require your full attention and your full accountability." A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Then the lights dimmed and the first video began to play. The screen glowed. A clip played grainy, silent footage from the 12th floor hallway camera. There was Gerald Hayes' shoulder-stiff face curled in disdain, knocking over a cleaning cart with calculated force. Then the slow-motion moment of water splashing upward, drenching the janitor who didn't flinch. Gasps echoed through the room. Some chuckled, thinking it was an old incident being used for a training exercise. Then came the audio, his voice clear and sharp. "Clean it up, and next time stay out of my way." Then another clip. Derek Vaughn in his designer suit, tossing a crumpled sandwich wrapper at someone, just off frame, smirking, "Come on, Jazz, show me those magic hands." Laughter, his, not hers. Another clip. Karen leaning in toward Derek during a hallway exchange, whispering, "Just delay the approval." He won't notice the discrepancy if it's buried under the Q4 surplus. And finally, Veronica Wells, that slap. The sound rang out in full volume. The entire room went silent. Veronica stiffened in her seat. Derek's smirk dissolved. Karen's fingers gripped her chair arms. Gerald looked around, blinking. Then the lights came up, and from the side of the room, the janitor stepped out. Only she wasn't pushing a cart. She wasn't in gloves or carrying a mop. She walked in wearing a black suit, perfectly cut, confident steps, chin raised, hair tied back with the same control she'd worn every night. Except now there was no need to blend in. She walked to the stage, ascended the steps, and turned to face them. Gerald stood. "What is this? What's she doing here? This is a leadership meeting." Robert Carter remained at the edge of the stage, arms folded, silent. Jasmine turned her gaze directly toward Gerald, then to the entire room. "I was invited," she said, upbeat. Then she reached for the lapel of her uniform top, the janitor's overshirt she still wore open over her suit, and pulled it off. Underneath her corporate badge glinted under the lights. Jasmine Elise Carter, Executive Advisor Office of the CEO. A gasp, then a collective intake of breath as reality set in. "I've worked every floor of this building for the past month," she said. Voice calm, measured. "Mopped your hallways, cleaned your messes, endured your silence, your jokes, your orders. I've watched how you treat people you think are beneath you," she paused. Veronica shifted uncomfortably. Derek looked pale. Karen didn't blink. Jasmine turned toward Gerald. "You ordered me out of this room before hearing a single word, before asking who I was. You saw the uniform and you decided I didn't belong." She stepped forward. "But I do belong here because this company carries my family's name, and as of next quarter, it carries my leadership." Dead silence. Robert stepped beside her, now placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "This," he said, "is your future CEO." Murmurs swept the room like wind through dry grass. Veronica stood slowly. "This is absurd. She infiltrated our staff. She posed under false pretenses. This is entrapment." Jasmine turned to her. "No, this is accountability." And then she opened the folder in her hands, the one thick with reports, screenshots, signatures, and time cards, and said, "Let's continue." The lights dimmed again, but this time no one relaxed. On the screen behind Jasmine, the first clip appeared, time-stamped, labeled Undeniable Exhibit 1, Gerald Hayes. There he was, barking at Jasmine over a hallway barely scuffed, ordering her to re-clean a spotless surface, telling another janitor off camera, "They only understand when you keep them under pressure." Then the infamous bucket scene, now slowed and enhanced. The tilt of the cart, the splash, the water hitting her face. Gerald's voice rang through the auditorium. "You people are all the same." Gasps, murmurs. Someone cursed under their breath. Gerald stood up, shaking his head. "This is out of context." "No," Jasmine replied without looking at him. "This is the context, yours." The screen shifted. Exhibit 2. Derek Vaughn, footage of the shredded papers deliberately dropped, his assistant asking, "Do you really need to do that?" To which Derek replied, "She cleans. I provide job security." Then audio overlays Derek bragging to another colleague about knowing how to move data quietly and referencing Karen. "She makes files disappear better than it ever could." Derek's face turned red. "That's not proof of anything illegal. Just banter? Then you won't mind if the board audits your Q4 activity logs," Jasmine said smoothly. "The same logs that match Karen's approval delays and the quiet prints made after midnight." Heads turned. Exhibit 3, Karen Myers. Video showed Karen telling another staffer, "I don't process claims from cleaning staff. They're never credible." Anyway, overlaid audio, "Just bury the discrepancy under marketing ops. If anyone asks, call it a projected write-off." Karen finally spoke. "You had no right to record private conversations. You had no right." Jasmine cut in her voice now, still to ignore complaints, conceal misconduct, and weaponize your position to shield corruption. Silence followed. Then the final reel, Exhibit 4, Veronica Wells. No one needed a reminder of the slap, but it played again. Not for shock, for truth, the audio was amplified. "Clear, you people never learn," Veronica's voice echoed into the frozen air. Jasmine let the clip finish, then walked to the front of the stage. "This wasn't a witch hunt, it was an X-ray," she said. "Not everyone in this room failed, but those who did so because they never imagined they'd be seen." The board of directors sat stone-faced in the front row. Robert Carter stepped up once again. Effective immediately, he said, "Gerald Hayes, Derek Vaughn, Karen Myers and Veronica Wells are placed under investigation and suspended without pay, pending termination procedures. Security will escort them out of the building. Veronica rose first, disbelief warping her features. "You'll regret this. I already did," Robert replied. Gerald tried to speak, but no one listened. Karen folded her arms, walked out without a word. Derek looked around for allies and found none. As the four were escorted through the aisles, the rest of the staff remained seated. Stunned, Jasmine stood still, watching them leave, not in triumph but in justice. They had made her invisible, but she had made them unforgettable. The sound of the heavy glass doors closing behind them was louder than any protest they could have made. Veronica, Gerald, Derek, and Karen had been escorted out by building security, not hurried, not dragged, but marched with the cold efficiency of consequence, long overdue. They passed rows of stunned employees, faces blank with shock, or worse, silent recognition. Jasmine remained on stage. She didn't watch them leave. She didn't need to. Justice didn't require spectacle. It required completion. Robert stepped back to the microphone, his voice steady but weighty. What just occurred was not about punishment. It was about accountability. And if any of you are wondering whether this decision was rushed, let me be clear. It wasn't rushed. It was delayed far too long. Murmurs filled the room, but no one interrupted. These individuals did not fail because they made mistakes. Robert continued, they failed because they believed no one was watching, because they believed leadership was above responsibility. He turned slightly into Jasmine, who now stood just behind him, composed, unshaken, quietly powerful. But someone was watching, not to tear this company down, but to rebuild it from the inside. With eyes open and heart steady, the employees sat silent. No shifting, no whispers, only listening. Robert took a slow breath. Effective immediately, Jasmine Elise Carter is appointed Interim Chief Operating Officer. Her leadership, her courage, and her integrity have earned her more than a title. They've earned her the right to reset this culture. Jasmine stepped forward, then not for applause, not for approval, but for declaration. "I'm not here to replace people," she said. "I'm here to replace the silence. I want a company where janitors can speak and be heard, where respect isn't reserved for suits, where accountability flows in every direction." She paused, scanning the room. "And if that vision makes anyone uncomfortable, now is the time to excuse yourself." No one moved. No one blinked. The silence that once surrounded her had turned into still attention. Outside the glass walls, the four who had once strutted through this building were now gone. No press releases, no graceful exits, just the quiet removal of rot. And in their place, something new had begun to take root. Not revenge, not fear, but clarity. And Jasmine, once overlooked, once dismissed, once soaked in dirty water, and silence, now stood at the helm of change, not with noise, but with purpose. The announcement came not from a press conference, not from a press release. It came from Robert Carter himself, standing beneath the gold-etched company crest in the boardroom that had for years echoed with voices that never included hers. Today, he began, we don't just address misconduct. We redefine leadership. The room was quiet, but the air was different. Charged, watching, listening. I have led this company for 32 years. I've seen it grow, falter, evolve, and I've learned that buildings don't rot from broken glass. They rot from unseen corners, left unchecked, uncleaned, and ignored. Jasmine saw those corners, and she didn't flinch. He turned toward her, his voice steady. Effective immediately, Jasmine Elise Carter will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer of Carter & Wells Holdings. There was no applause at first, just stunned silence, and then slowly a rising wave of clapping, not out of habit but out of recognition, not just for the title but for the journey. For the woman who had swept the halls, scrubbed the conference rooms, eaten alone in the janitor's break space, endured slurs, silence, and sabotage just to understand the truth beneath the polished surface. Jasmine didn't smile. Not out of arrogance, but because she knew the moment wasn't about her victory, it was about responsibility. She stepped up to the podium. "I didn't ask for this role to make headlines," she said. "I asked for it because leadership isn't earned in quiet offices. It's earned in the shadows where others refuse to look." She glanced at the staff before her, executives and assistants, analysts and janitors alike. "I will not lead from behind glass. I will lead from the ground up. And if you think titles excuse cruelty or that power shields behavior, let me assure you this building now has windows on every floor. There were no slogans, no promises of perfection. Just one woman, once invisible, now unignorable in the seat of power, not because it was given, because it was earned. Mop in one hand, truth in the other, the lobby still gleamed. But now it gleamed differently, not just from polished marble or the fresh scent of eucalyptus-infused floor cleaner, but from the atmosphere itself. There was a softness in the way people moved through the space, a calm in their voices, a willingness to look up, to say hello, to ask names and mean it. 6 months had passed since the reckoning, and Carter and Wells had become something. It had long forgotten how to be human. The janitorial staff now had a lounge of their own, not a cramped storage room with flickering lights, but a real space with lockers, ergonomic chairs, free coffee, and the kind of quiet respect that used to be reserved for managers. Rosa now led the night shift. Omar had been promoted to chief of building safety. And every employee, regardless of title, tended the same quarterly town hall meetings where grievances were heard anonymously and publicly addressed within 10 days. A promise made, a promise kept. The old HR department had been completely overhauled. In its place, a new branch. People and culture run, not by silence, but by empathy. The executive floors, once tense and territorial, now welcomed rotation programs where team leaders shadowed entry-level roles for a day each quarter. It wasn't mandatory, it was modeled because Jasmine did it herself. Every 3 months, she left her corner office, pulled on gloves, and spent a night shift with the crew she had once walked among in silence. Not for publicity, for perspective. One evening, she stood in the staff kitchen, pouring tea beside a young man from the outreach team. He whispered, "Ma'am, I used to be afraid to make eye contact with anyone above floor 5. She looked at him and smiled gently. "Then we still have more work to do." But it was progress, real, measurable, felt. There were still deadlines, still difficult days, still the high-stakes pressure of real estate negotiations, mergers. But now when someone dropped their coffee in the hallway, 3 people helped clean it. When a janitor walked into the elevator, no one looked away. And every new employee orientation ended with a simple line etched on the final slide: "Everyone matters," especially when no one's watching. It wasn't a tagline, it was a warning and a vow.